Am I a free man? Yeah, that's always the aim of living. I'm Abdulrahman Naanseh, a Syrian artist. I have a residency at George Mason University, and I am fellow with the Artist Protection Fund. In this place, Lincoln Memorial, I remember the time when the people had the freedom in this place, in this country, and I am here now in this country for searching for my freedom. About leaving Syria at that time, I remember the. I remember I'm studying after the college, like a diploma, and trying to just work and dealing with everything. It's very hard way. The life, it's very hard in that part and that time in Syria in 2016 to 2017, but
so Syrian war resulted in a great number of displacements, and the numbers are indeed striking. So since 2011, and let me remind you, we're talking about a country of around 20 million, even though we do not have the exact numbers. So around 7 million people were displaced to neighboring countries in the region, such as Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, and other countries as well in the Middle East and North Africa region. And around 7 million Syrians are internally displaced. And then we have around, these are the numbers from the United Nations, we have around 1.5 million Syrians displaced to different part of the world outside of the region. So if you think about these numbers, I think they really represent the gravity of the Syrian refugee crisis.
The last time I saw my parents in 2016, I think. 2000, and then the end of 2015, 2016. Yeah.
I think it's a very important question to ask. Why do people leave the places that they live in, and why do they become refugees? Because I think there is a lot of misconception about that. And this is partly because we have a very restricted legal definition of a refugee, which was defined by the United Nations as referring to people who are running away from war, violence, persecution. And so there is a lot of emphasis on war and violence, and which are very important events. So when we speak of refugees, we typically tend to emphasize conditions of war and violence, and we also refer to people who are legally applying to asylum. But as scholars and activists, we have a broader definition of refugees which focuses on forced displacement. So when we focus on forced displacement, a lot of factors can also play into the fact that people are becoming refugees. For example, climate change is a big factor. Authoritarian regimes are a big factor. Extreme poverty that may or may not be related to war and violence could be a factor. So I think it's really important to use the term displacement or forced displacement and refugee to refer to broader group of people who may not be registered as refugee in a legal way, but at the same time, they had to leave where they are, because it's definitely not easy to leave where you are. It brings up a lot of different struggles and issues.
Since I moved to the United States, and with the support and interest of George Mason University and Artist Protection Fund, I have started to increase the opportunities available, and I start making special exhibitions, and this is the beginning.
Avi's had great success and has been a great beacon of that potential opportunity for other programs. The artist in me really feels that yes, we need to be broadening, that is the outreach, and to discover what's the best fit. Working with the Artist Protection Fund director, they're very specific and particular in deciding which artist goes to what university and program. What's the best fit? So it's we can be open and receptive, and when an artist is available and is interested, we would certainly be interested in being contacted by the Artist Protection Fund.
Well, I would say it's like they're a partial funder for the program, but they're professionals at getting in touch with the artists that are in need, and then reaching out and establishing partnerships, especially with us, to provide so that Nason can then also contribute funds and space and resources to their efforts to get these artists, protected, literally.
A lot of people think about refugees and other displaced peoples and those who are really advocates or concerned about their well-being. A lot of attention tends to be placed on things like, physical safety, food, water, sanitation, education, human rights. And all of those are, of course, really, really critical to well-being. But unfortunately, often the arts and culture are ignored. They're not recognized to be really vital to human survival. And one of the reasons that I'm focusing on the arts is that what I found is that the arts are kind of front and center. As even as people move, you would think that they wouldn't have time or be thinking about the arts, but in fact, even as they're moving and in these kind of really volatile positions, they might be telling each other stories. They might be singing for comfort. They might be getting together and sharing certain cultural things to bond within groups that are suddenly finding themselves together. And so even in the most kind of traumatic moments, you'll see art happening. And then as people settle into new locations, and again, whether that's temporarily or permanently, people have the need to express themselves. Every single person who's displaced has experienced some kind of trauma, and art is a very important way to be able to express sometimes things that one can't express otherwise, that one doesn't even have words for or know. Just kind of deep emotional experiences that need outlet. People use arts to connect, to build community, to make money, which is really, really important. People use art in faith to gather together and engage in various kind of religious activities. It's really important for raising children. A lot of times the trauma on children is particularly strong, and art can be an avenue for letting them express themselves, but also for having things be okay for a while. For one of the big focuses on my project is joy and pleasure and fun and entertainment. And we tend to kind of think of refugees as being just traumatized victims who are always sad and feeling terrible. And of course, there's plenty to feel terrible about, but as human beings, wherever we are, especially when the pressures release a little bit, human beings fall in love. Human beings laugh and talk to each other and share and entertain. And that's a huge part of survival. And it's, again, something that we don't think about very much, or we don't focus on enough. And in my mind, by not focusing on it, it contributes to the dehumanizing, this idea that, well, a refugee is just a refugee. So many people that I've talked about who are displaced, they're kind of like, they'll scream out to me, I'm a human being. Like, why are people treating me like a refugee when I'm a human being? Why aren't they treating me like the human being that I am? And I feel like this kind of not recognizing the joy and the art and the creativity in people who are displaced contributes to that idea of them as kind of just a refugee.
Using my art in calligraphy as tools to communicate and share my culture and my hope.
Because language itself is insufficient sometimes. So art not only fills that gap, but also allows us to capture things that sometimes words are not able to capture. And philosophy and political science and social sciences and history, they use words to communicate. Art actually goes beyond and around words.
Basin Exhibitions has been growing, tremendously in the past couple of years. It's a special unit within the college. And our function is really to look at art as a learning tool and as an agent of social change. So we're always looking for artists who can, cross disciplines and work with other, with scientists or scholars on the content of the work. So it's like we want to work with content, but also context. We have a mural program where we're putting art out into public space. And so yeah, our goal is really, in the long run, to turn Mason exhibitions into a campus museum and to have a museum dedicated to research in the arts.
And I am interested in art because I have my own philosophy, of course, like everyone does. And I think art is the single most efficient way to understand and address and critique and portray the world compared to all the other avenues. So I don't think it's just a matter of, for me, it's not just a matter of opinion or preference that I like art. I think that if you want to understand the history of the world, not just the current moment, and the trajectory and the ups and downs, as well as the questions of justice and injustice, and so on, you can pursue various avenues such as history, philosophy, and so on to understand. But I think sometimes those avenues don't capture the many intricacies and dimensions of the world.
And let me talk a bit about how Abdulrahman's work is representing the region. And it's I think an interesting question because again, it's maybe putting too much pressure on one specific context, but I still believe there is a lot to explore here because his work is extremely rich and provoking in a positive in so many different ways. First of all, what I really loved about his work is, and I think that's kind of really an exceptional success, that he has this dialectics of different things, which makes us to recognize the complexity of the whole conflict, both in the region and in the context of Syria, Lebanon, the US, the three major countries that he spent time in. For instance, in one of the series that he worked on called The Movements, I realized that a lot of artwork reveals not only movement per se, but also stuckness, right? Like not being able to move, trying to move, not being able to move. So in the very same drawing, you see how, movement is an aspiration. People are trying to move, but at the same time, people are trying to people are feeling stuck and trying to get rid of this stuckness. So this whole dialectics of different contradictory feelings, hope and despair, are present in the same drawing, stuckness and movement, joy and suffering, because often we see artists might lean towards more suffering or maybe hope. But what I really loved about Abdulrahman's work is he has this, I might be reading wrong, who knows, but what I saw is there's this really beautiful balance of, representing and voicing suffering, which is tremendous, but also showing us a sense of agency on the side of different Syrians going through this tragedy.
Following in Fenwick Library, a group of students came up and they were just like, I am just so amazed to see like Arabic language on the wall as art. Like they really appreciated the cultural recognition, in a sense, through art. And like I don't think they were like a biomedical researcher or something. And for them to then see a contemporary Middle Eastern artist, speaking their language in art, big on the wall, was super important for them. And I think for our community in general, we need to do more so that we can see more what people want or what people respond to. It's all great to do things, in your little gallery, but it's more important that the message get out more broadly. The practices that we are developing basically for exhibitions that are much more inclusive and open to collaboration, and not knowing what the answer is, not going to hit it over the head with certain kind of narrow scholarship, but open it up to, that's why in our panel discussion we had folklorists, policy people, people that work with immigrants or migration patterns. There's just so many topics that underlie the art of Abi that, it was just, I can just say it was really easy. It was the easiest thing to do. So, yeah.
I got involved with Abdulrahman's exhibition when we initially discussed it the year prior. We set up some studio visits. Initially, I was a little bit hesitant. I didn't know when Don Russell, the university curator, mentioned to me that this was Arabic calligraphy. I had a number of associations in my head with calligraphy in general. So I went in a little bit skeptical, just because as a contemporary art exhibition platform, I'm always looking for things that talk about now, that respond to the times. I knew Abdulrahman's story, and I knew that would be very relevant. But the work, it sounded traditional at the onset. So I went in with a little bit of skepticism. I was immediately proved wrong. I mean, what he was doing with calligraphy was clearly present, clearly of now. He was taking a form that is historically very traditional, very kind of codified and conservative, I would say. And he was using it to kind of break new ground in my mind. His work was much closer to abstract art forms that we know of in the West, but with this layer of a text. These are all text generated poetic phrases that I, as a Westerner, couldn't read without his ability to translate it. So I had to appreciate it purely formally. And to me, right away, I was blown away by what he was doing formally. I thought this was extremely innovative and had a lot of elements that you don't need a background in calligraphy to appreciate. The line quality was extremely developed.
When people talk about art, globally speaking, I think there is something that evades some listeners, and that is, or viewers, and that is, they assume that because it's a different region, the art must be different. I think all art is similar in the sense that it's an expression of the artist about the world around them. The differences come in terms of sometimes logistics, sometimes freedom of expression, sometimes rules and regulations. When it comes to the Middle East, we have, as I think everyone knows, a very vibrant artist and art community, and exhibitions and products. The one thing that animates art in the Middle East, perhaps in a way that is different from, say, art in Belgium, is that it carries a little bit more of a responsibility to communicate, because other forms of communication, sometimes including books and articles that are quite bold, are not always in high supply, not because people don't feel things or don't think things, but because sometimes there's a high price to pay for criticizing, for instance, dictatorship. So art ends up becoming an alternative way of expression that can swim and exist under the radar. Same thing with nonfiction, which allows a lot of people to express themselves, even if the feared actor, which is the state, knows what this art is about. It lets it go because it is not obvious. But it cannot deal with an article that calls, for instance, for the overthrow of the regime, because that is direct and it impinges on the actor that is being critiqued. If they don't take action, it impinges on their reputation and so on and so forth. So art becomes not just what it is everywhere else in the world. It has this added dimension. And that dimension doesn't exist only in the Middle East. It exists in all sorts of contexts where art is a more productive way or a safer way of communicating opinions and positions. And it also exists in the West in the same manner, because not everything in the West is allowable. There are, for instance, differences between the United States and Europe in terms of talking about things like religion. The freedom with which people address and talk about religion in Europe sometimes is lacking in the United States, and art sometimes expresses that. Same thing with questions of sexual orientations. What we are witnessing today in the United States wasn't witnessed 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And art was a better way of communicating it, even at a time when there is no context or a receptive ear among the populace for some of those things, for instance, that we are witnessing today. So it is not the Middle East is not an exception. There are conditions and circumstances in which people find themselves, and they make do within these conditions. And I think it's important to not see those things as exceptions, but as particularities.
I've always been interested in calligraphy. I studied book arts, and I had a mentor who was a typographer and calligrapher, and so I was sensitized to calligraphy at an early age. We have also done an exhibition several years ago of Chinese calligraphy, which was fascinating to have 70 large scrolls on display. And it just got me thinking about, all languages started with pictures, and gradually a grammar kind of emerges from visual symbols. And I'm just really interested in sort of the primitive, for lack of a better word, for the ancient histories of language and how they developed around the world as a part of, the growth of civilization, record keeping, and I think it's like if you look at the cave paintings, the original cave paintings were kind of like spatter paints, stencils, really. So actually, it's stencil art was the first kind of cave painting. So, when I heard that Avi was a calligrapher, I was immediately interested and really wanted to, and then I saw the work, and it was so great that he was really pushing at the edges of tradition while honoring the traditions as well. I think that's very rare that you can have somebody that can really balance, cultural histories, religious histories, social histories, and in the history of sort of Arabic calligraphy. So, yeah.
In a very different way, I think Abdulrahman's art is amazing in terms of obviously an outlet for him and his own expression. But here at George Mason, it's been so valuable in terms of educating other people about his own experience, about his own creativity, bringing people. I mean, he's such an inspiration in terms of the art and kind of inspiring people artistically. But also, I think a lot of us just don't know very much about what's going on in Syria. We don't know what it means to be displaced. And so his art is really important, but also his sharing his story is really important for us to hear on the Mason campus, but also just in the US more broadly.
And I think another really important point is the generosity, the spirit of generosity that Abdulrahman is sharing his story with us. He is a great storyteller. If you can listen to him in Arabic, that's even wonderful because this is his mother tongue, but he's, I think, also doing an excellent job in English. And he was invited to my class to share his art work and experiences with my students. And I think students were just, amazed by the Arabic calligraphy. That was their first time being exposed to Arabic calligraphy. So they learned a great deal about the culture, that part of that particular art form. But at the same time, when Abdulrahman generously shared with us his story in Syria, in Lebanon, and I hope that in the future he will share more of his story in the US. It's very new here, that we kind of tend to understand better in what ways his own personal story is also representing and speaking to some of the issues in the region. So I think those two elements, that being a great storyteller and giving us a sense of how his story has been shaping his artwork, and at the same time the artwork demonstrating the complexity of the situation and different sets of experiences that displaced Syrians face are making his work incredibly rich and exceptionally beautiful.
Another change that we've been working on in the last year is adding participatory activities in the gallery in the context of the show. We did it with the Graphic Liberation Show, where we actually set up a print studio in the gallery and students could draw on the resources of the exhibition to create new work. And so this was just a logical next step, is to set up a calligraphy scriptorium in the gallery so that students can learn calligraphy. Learning calligraphy, I think, is super important, and we should have been teaching more of it earlier. It's very important in terms of graphic design. It's important just in terms of design in general. If you think about Steve Jobs, when he was in college, the most important class he took in college was calligraphy, because it got him into this idea of design. And you see the result as the Apple products are extremely well designed. So I actually think calligraphy should be taught to everybody because it gives them a greater sense of design, proportion, communication, things like that.
I will be teaching tomorrow. Is the first day of teaching the calligraphy, Arabic calligraphy for beginners, and the drawing also for beginners, I think. And this is I'm exciting. It's a long time I didn't teach anything for like a drawing or calligraphy, but I will try so hard to do it.
So I am a folklorist by training. I consider arts in all of the work that I do. And in my definition of arts, I think of arts as being very broad, any kind of creative activity that people are engaged with. So it can be the kind of art that makes it on studio walls and museums, on performance, in performance halls, on stages. But a lot of what I look at is the arts that people make in everyday life. So it can be things like singing songs together. It can be making, ceramic pots to drink water. It can be poetry, children getting together and drawing pictures. So it's a very broad range of arts that I look at. So I am currently involved in a global research project about refugees and how they're using arts in their everyday lives as they're moving through different spaces, and also as they relocate and settle in locations.
I'm trying to have the normal life and live the normal life and have this experience, because I lost it years from the very the first time of starting the revolution and the war in Syria. We lost the way of normal life, and I'm trying to have it now. And then when I have it, I think I will try to do something else. When the people use the calligraphy tools for the first time, they use it in their perspective, and that gives me the time to explore more ways. In this process, we can know each other. I hope to reach a stage where I can work on and use all available materials to express meaning in the Arabic letter. Of course, my interests are not limited to visual arts, but I go far with poetry, literature, cinema, and nature observation, all of which have a stake in one place or another in the production of my artworks. I am the displaced, pursued by his country, and the stranger. This exhibit allows me to connect with people. I had met many wonderful people. Calligraphy, the art of letters, abstract of language, moving with the sound of words and the meanings. My education helped me develop my skills and experience through continuous training and how to explore new techniques. To work with other artists have always been an opportunity for a dialogue between calligraphy and other arts. I am currently working on a set of designs for a photography book about Jerusalem.
Well, let me just say that I am very honored to be able to speak to the work of Abdulrahman Naanseh, who I have come to know and respect and admire greatly. But also allow me to use his short name, Abi, which he sometimes goes by here henceforth, if that's okay.
Amaya Freeman, yeah, that's always the aim of living, uh, but there's always a system, something you should do. Maybe you don't like it, but still, it's like between to be free with yourself, with your time, with your idea, with your talk, with your speech, but there's something else you should do. It's not always freely, yeah. But I'm more, yeah, I think I have, that's the benefits to be artist. You can do anything, and that's, I think, the ultimate freedom.